your practice, your season?
This is Jungwon Kim, and enjoy, and we'll catch you on the other side. Yeah.
So sadly transient, you'd never guess it could ever be so easy to see.
So it seems like there's this new and massive wave sweeping across the waters, and it's not the surf, it's the onslaught of adult learners, surfers, I don't know what you call it, late bloomers. And it's an interesting phenomena on many levels. I think you are a great kind of hero of that of that movement. For starters, you grew up in Orange County, California, right?
I did.
So surfing was something that was close to you, but you accessed it later in life.
Well, I'll say, I survived growing up in Orange County, California, in the 80s. It's a really different place now. Just last year, it finally flipped blue, which really was quite stunning to those of us who grew up there in the 80s and even the 90s. When I lived there, it was a Republican stronghold in the middle of Southern California, and a very, very segregated place. And it remains an extremely segregated place. There are very large ethnic enclaves of Asian Americans and also many, many different Latino communities. But at that time, I would say, the beaches and beach culture in general was really dominated by white beachgoers and white surfers. So I was really lucky as a kid because my father's office manager really loved the beach. And she did not have kids of her own, but she really loved kids. And she loved, for some reason, really loved hanging out with me and my younger brother and sister. And so every weekend, sometimes Saturday and Sunday, she would take her niece and nephew and the three of us to either Huntington Beach or Corona Del Mar or Newport Beach. And I mean, to this day, I'm just astounded and so grateful to her. But I can't quite imagine how she did it. She just packed up 5 kids and tons of snacks, and then we would just spend all day there. Looking back on that time also, it was free range parenting in a way, even though she wasn't our parent. So, I mean, in my recollection, we spent hours and hours in the water, and she was not in the water with us. So I was 12, my sister was 8. My brother, I think, stuck around near her because he was only 2. Later on, maybe I was 15. My sister would have been 11. And there we were, just, body surfing in the water, playing in the waves. Patty just was there on the beach, holding down the fort. Of course, now in this age of helicopter parenting, it's hard to imagine bringing someone else's kids to the beach and just having them play in the water. And, the surf in Southern California, it's the Pacific Ocean. It gets pretty strong. There are sharks, it's a slightly rougher water than we usually get out here. But we grew up doing that. And I used to watch the surfers. I was obsessed with the surfers, and I would see them, down the beach and out in the water. And I always thought that is the coolest thing. It just looks like ultimate freedom. It's so beautiful. Wow. Too bad I'll never be able to do that. And I mean, I feel like maybe many women had this thought in the 80s, just looking out at who was surfing and seeing only men. But as a woman of color, as an Asian American girl, that thought was even multiplied, manyfold, because I just didn't think it was for me. I didn't think anything like that could ever belong to me. So, continued going to the beach, would always get in the water every time. I learned how to body surf and catch waves. And then I think I was 39 years old. I was about to be 40, and I had just survived a very sad yet amicable divorce, as well as a very terrible rebound relationship after the divorce. And, I was approaching my 40th birthday, and I thought, well, gosh, if I live to be 80, that would be really lucky. And I hope I live to be 80. But if I live to be 80, that means this is now the midway point. And not that it's all downhill from here, but I better start doing some of the things I have always spoken about doing and never really took the initiative to do. And there were three things that were sort of on my list. And number one was surfing. Number two was meditation, to really start meditating instead of just reading about meditating. and then number three was to learn Spanish, because I just felt like, wow, living in the United States, especially growing up in California, it's ridiculous that I don't speak Spanish. So I very earnestly set about doing all three. And the surfing I started I took a trip to Sayulita, Mexico. That would have been in what year did I turn? If I just turned 50 and it's 2020, so 2010, I went to Sayulita. It was just a sweet little town at that point, and I took a few surf lessons there, and then I came home, and Mike Ming,
shout out to Mike Ming.
Mike Ming helped me buy a board, and then he basically continued my surf lessons here in New York City at Rockaway. We were at the beach, and he just really generously, paddled out with me and gave me lots of pointers. And so I started surfing. And then that was around the time that I met you, and you had surfed some as a much younger person and hadn't done it in a long time. And I think we both basically sort of got into the water at the same time, although you very rapidly surpassed me.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Like, how did that change your life? Like, what happened, and how did you stick with it? And you're a mother of two teenage girls. I mean, it's a lot. And sometimes you had a car, sometimes you didn't have a car. Like, what's your relationship like to the water also, now that you have this kind of outlet in New York?
Yeah. I mean, because my kids were really little, they were, I think, like 4 and 8 when I first started surfing. Getting out to the water, it took a lot of machinations on my part. I want to just thank my sister, Jungwon Kim, publicly on the airwaves, because she was living with me for, I think, almost 10 years. And so I would very often leave in the morning, letting her know I'll be back by like 9 or something like that, and go really, really early in the morning, often with you, sometimes with Mike, sometimes with other people. But, when you live with your sister, and she, of course, has her own life, and she had a dog and all of those things, I didn't want to infringe too much. So it wasn't really something that I felt I could ask her, too frequently. There's a balance when you have a housemaid or with anybody in your family, and I didn't want her to feel, taken advantage of in any way. So I went when I could. It was really hard. I also have worked full time ever since I first moved to New York.
So basically your sister watched your kids while you were gone.
Care of the kids, and I would have to come back before work, or, once in a blue moon, the convergence of a nice swell with clean conditions that wasn't too big for an old lady like me, with, a weekend. The weekend, and a weekend when my sister was cool, staying home with the kids. I mean, that was like the triple whammy of, serendipity. But more often I would see perfect conditions and just kind of have to let it slip away because I, couldn't get out there, or I had work or whatever. And so, I mean, I can just admit this to you now. When in those early first couple of years, it was so hard for me to actually get out to the beach and surf. And I just felt there were so many limitations. I mean, first and foremost being I'm not super athletic to begin with. And I know that you were able, because you, I think at that time were freelancing, video directing. So you had intense periods on and then periods off. And I saw that you would go a lot more frequently. And you just became such an amazing surfer within a really short span of time. And at one point I said to you,
obsessive person.
well, and whatever it is, whatever the reasons are, you really, you know, it was amazing to see you do that. And I was really happy for you, but full transparency, I was super envious. I was like, wow, she just got so good so fast. And I think it's because she's able to go out there more often, but there's also, I mean, there was some other thing that was happening. And at one point, I think I told you, you know, that I was feeling not begrudging you your amazing success and improvement at surfing, but I was feeling like, wow, why can't I have that too? Why can't I get good? You know, and then it was really great. You were really kind. And you said to me, hey, Jungwon, remember, I was an athlete. I was a college varsity athlete or whatever you call it. Sorry, but Karen,
you know that thing.
badass lacrosse player and serious athlete who's trained, you know, all your life. And with that little caveat, you just helped me release all of my FOMO around, you know, not improving quickly, sometimes feeling like I wasn't improving at all. And I think it's just that for me, the learning curve was much, much less steep and much, much longer. But now, after 10 years and a few surf trips under my belt, I can confidently say I'm a mediocre surfer. I'm not bad. I can catch a wave and I can do a couple of cutbacks, you know, in ideal conditions, not on a beach break at Rockaway maybe, but if I'm at a lovely point break somewhere. And I mean, in this lifetime, it's kind of all I aspire to, you know, I mean, given the cards that I was dealt and coming to surfing so late in life. And, you know, I'm now kind of at the phase where I just don't really have that regret anymore. I used to really carry around like, oh God, if only I'd started as a kid, or if only, you know, I'd started at least before I had kids of my own, I could have also become a much better surfer. And, you know, I think learning surfing in tandem with really starting an earnest Buddhist meditation practice, there are just so many metaphors every time I go to the water. And I think one of the greatest ones for me has been the idea of really just being fully present to wherever you are in that moment. Even if it's a moment of frustration or elation or joy or FOMO, as I often feel. That's just where I am. And there's so many different conditions that lead up to every single moment. And it doesn't make sense to try to unravel them all and think, oh, what if this or what if that? So, you know, the most important thing to me now is every time I get in the water, it's such a gift because it takes a lot for me to get there. At this point now, with no car, it takes the generosity of a friend and neighbor like you or, you know, other friends I have here. And I'm not so worried. You know, I've never really had that athlete's mentality. Like I used to go running, you know, I'd run like 6 or 7 miles. And my really dear friend who was also an athlete would always ask me, oh, what was your time? And I would just look at her like, what do you mean my time? I went at 8 and she's like, no, what was your time? And it was a question that didn't even compute for me.
Yeah, that is totally an athlete thing.
Yeah, she just thought I was ridiculous for not knowing how long it took me to run my 6 miles. And I thought it was
pretty
very
good.
bizarre.
6 to 7 miles, that's pretty decent.
I mean, in my 20s, but, you know, I thought it was very strange to time your runs. Why would anybody want to time their runs? So, you know, I'm saying all of this kind of to illustrate the idea that this is about midlife renaissance.